3,000 years of silence stretched across the stars like a held breath. 3,000 years since the Galactic Accord was signed in the blood and exhaustion of a dozen civilizations. 3,000 years since humanity had shaken hands, or performed the nearest equivalent, with beings who saw us as curious, fragile, dangerous apes. 3,000 years of peace, built on a very simple foundation: mutual fear, mutual respect, and mutual exhaustion from a war no one had truly won. And now, on a cold Tuesday morning, in the 44th century, it was over. The transmission came in at 4:47 a.m., Earth Standard Time, on a day that had begun completely It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't scrambled. It wasn't even sent through proper diplomatic channels where someone might have softened it. It was broadcast on every frequency, on every wavelength, to every planet, station, and colony humanity had ever touched across 2,000 worlds. The HFY Supreme Collective, rulers of 11 star systems, and self-proclaimed masters of galactic order, had a message for humanity, and that message was short, precise, and absolutely devastating in its sheer, breathtaking arrogance. To the species known as humanity, the Galactic Accord is hereby dissolved. The truce of 3,000 years has ended. You have occupied space that belongs to the collective. You have expanded beyond the boundaries we permitted you to inhabit. You have grown beyond what we allowed. Effective immediately, you are declared an enemy of the HFY Supreme Collective. Surrender your colonies. Surrender your fleets. Surrender your worlds and your stations, or face total and complete annihilation. You have 72 hours to comply. This transmission will not be repeated. The collective does not negotiate with lesser species. Then silence. Cold, empty, ringing silence across every channel, every frequency, every corner of human space. On Earth, in the United Human Defense Command Center buried 300 meters below Geneva, General Mata Hase stared at the screen above her workstation. She was 61 years old, with gray streaks threading through dark hair, a scar across her chin from a training accident 2 decades past. She had fought in 2 border skirmishes, 3 piracy suppression campaigns, 1 genuine alien contact incident near the Reach, and survived them all. She had the kind of calm that only comes from having survived truly terrible things and understanding, deeply, what survived actually means. She read the message once, then a second time, then a third time, slowly, making sure she hadn't missed anything. Then she did something that absolutely no one in the room expected from the second highest ranking military officer in human history. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not an awkward, nervous laugh, born of shock, a full, genuine, from-the-belly laugh that echoed off the reinforced concrete walls. Her aide, Lieutenant Yusef Adebayo, 24 years old. 8 months out of the academy, stared at her with eyes so wide they looked painted on. General, he said carefully, his voice staying admirably steady given the circumstances. The HFY just declared war on humanity. Mara wiped actual tears from her eyes. I know, son. I read it 3 times. They have 11 star systems. Their fleet is estimated at over 40,000 warships by our last intelligence assessment. No. Their ground force is a lone number in the hundreds of billions. Their industrial capacity outmatches ours on paper by a factor of... I know all of that, Lieutenant. General, with respect, why are you laughing at a declaration of war from the most powerful military collective in this sector of the galaxy? Mara straightened up, composed herself with practiced ease, and looked at the young lieutenant with an expression that was equal parts fond and quietly terrifying. Because Lieutenant David Collective just made the single greatest mistake any civilization has made in the last 3,000 years of recorded galactic history. And they have absolutely no idea that they've made it. She turned back to her screen and began pulling up communication channels, her fingers moving with calm, unhurried precision. Get me the Council. Get me Fleet Command. Get me colony governors across the frontier systems. And someone make a very large pot of coffee, because we are going to be busy, and I am genuinely looking forward to every second of this. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with a friend who loves HFY. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything to us. There is a lot more story coming, so stay right here. Now, back to the war that humanity was about to win before the Vethkai even understood. They'd already lost it. The Vethkai Supreme Collective had not always been arrogant. 3,000 years ago, they had been something rarer and more honest. They had been terrified. The signing of the Galactic Accord hadn't been a gesture of goodwill or diplomatic grace. It had been a desperate, urgent measure taken by beings who had run the numbers and didn't like what they found. Because 3,000 years ago, humanity had done something no species in the known galaxy had ever managed to do before. They had survived first contact with the Vethkai war fleet. Not just survived, not just endured. They had won, against impossible odds, against every rational projection, against everything the Vethkai thought they knew about how wars worked. It had been a small engagement at first, a misunderstanding, as these things often are. A Vethkai scouting force had found a human colony ship in the disputed territory of the Kepler Reach. The Vethkai fired first. That detail was important, and humanity never forgot it. They fired first, without warning or provocation. The colony ship was registered as the Endurance. She carried 1,200 civilians, 40 crew members, and a security escort of exactly 6 patrol craft, 6 small patrol ships, outgunned by a ratio of roughly 33-1, against a scouting force of 200 Vethkai warships. The Vethkai commander, whose name translated with painful irony as Glorious, fully expected a surrender signal within 30 minutes. What he got instead was the most baffling, infuriating, paradigm-destroying 17 hours of his entire military career. The Endurance's captain, a woman named Yolanda Ferris, had been a cargo hauler for 20 years before she'd taken the colony mission contract. She had no formal military training. She had no tactical doctrine downloaded into her command chair. She had no battle plan. What she had was a cargo hold full of industrial mining equipment, 1,200 colonists who were furious about being shot at without warning, and 6 patrol craft pilots who had collectively decided they were not dying today. The battle that followed was later studied at every military academy humanity would ever build, not for its tactical brilliance, but for something harder to define and more important: its sheer, incomprehensible, unbreakable stubbornness. The Endurance took 17 direct hits in the first 4 hours. Each one should have destroyed her. 3 of them should have vaporized the ship entirely. She didn't stop. Her captain kept flying, kept maneuvering, kept sending her crew to patch what could be patched and reroute what could be rerouted. The colonists in the cargo hold started loading mining drones with explosive charges pulled from the drilling equipment and launching them at Vethkai ships. It worked. It worked because it was insane enough that the Vethkai had no defensive protocol for ore drones being used as guided missiles. The children were moved to the engine room because the engineering section had the most armor plating, and within 2 hours the teenagers were helping engineers reroute power to the shields. 8-year-olds were running power couplings through maintenance corridors, while their parents loaded improvised weapons in the hold above. BR-12, the Vethkai scouting force, had lost 31 ships to 6 patrol craft and a cargo hauler, and 1,200 colonists with mining drones, and absolutely no intention of stopping. By hour 17, Glorious Skrusher of lesser things made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered a retreat. A 200-ship Vethkai scouting force retreated from a cargo ship and 6 patrol craft. The report he filed upon returning to Vethkai space was, by all accounts, one of the most alarming documents their supreme intelligence had ever processed in 5 centuries of record-keeping. "These creatures do not behave according to any rational model we possess," he wrote, his translator working overtime. "They absorbed damage that should have ended them 3 times over and continued fighting at full aggression. They showed 0 signs of surrender when catastrophically outmatched. They appeared to become more dangerous the more damage they took. Their tactics were incomprehensible because they had no tactics in any formal sense. They improvised with whatever was available, including equipment designed specifically for extracting minerals from solid rock. Their children participated in their defense. Their civilians participated in their defense. The distinction between soldier and civilian appeared to dissolve entirely under threat. I do not recommend further engagement with this species until we have a complete and thorough analysis of what exactly this species is and what it is capable of. The full analysis the collective commissioned took 50 years to complete. At the end of it, the Vethkai collective had a very long, very detailed, very carefully worded, and thoroughly terrifying report about humanity sitting on the Supreme Leader's desk. They decided, unanimously and immediately, to sign a truce. The truce was supposed to be temporary, just a pause, long enough to figure out how to handle these bizarre, improvising, never-stopping creatures from the blue-green world. 3,000 years later, they were still supposed to be figuring it out. But old fears fade. Old lessons get buried in classified archives. New leadership rises with new confidence, and old arrogance, and fresh clothing. And now someone new had come to power in the collective. Someone who had not been there for the original report. Someone who had been told that the truce was a mistake made by weak predecessors. His name, in the elaborate ceremonial language of the Veth, translated to something like sovereign-voice-of-the-eternal-collective- and its rightful-dominion. When they eventually learned of him, would unanimously and without ceremony call him Steve. Steve had decided the old guard was wrong. That humanity wasn't special. That they had been lucky, once, 3,000 years ago, against a smaller force with a cautious commander. That with 40,000 warships and proper commitment, they could be brushed aside like any other frontier species that had overstayed its welcome. Steve was about to have the worst few months of his political life, and he had absolutely earned every second of it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Share this story with someone who needs to see what happens when you underestimate humanity. We've got a long way to go, and it only gets better from here. The 72-hour deadline passed. Humanity did not surrender. Not a single colony went dark. Not a single fleet stood down. Not one planetary governor sent a letter of capitulation. What happened instead was something the Vethkai intelligence services intercepted in vast quantities and could not, for the life of them, parse correctly. There was laughter, a truly alarming, ubiquitous, almost civilization-wide amount of laughter. There were things the analysts eventually determined were called memes. The Vethkai had no concept of memes, and when their senior analysts attempted to decode their cultural significance, 3 of them quietly requested psychological support services. There were news broadcasts across every human colony where commentators discussed the declaration of war with the relaxed, almost bored energy of people debating a minor sporting disagreement. One particularly popular human broadcaster said, on live transmission watched by 11 billion people, "So the Vethkai want a war with us? Did they forget what happened at the Kepler Reach? Did they genuinely not read the history?" Another said, "Look, I understand people are nervous. I'm not saying be comfortable. I'm saying I've seen the projections, and if they think 40,000 warships against what we've quietly been building for 3,000 years is enough, someone needs to have a long talk with their intelligence service." A third commentator, who appeared to be eating some kind of snack, live on transmission while delivering military analysis to 6 billion viewers, simply shrugged and said, "They'll figure it out. Give it a few months." The Vethkai intelligence chief compiled these intercepts with hands that weren't entirely steady and presented them to Sovereign Voice of the Eternal Collect. To Steve. In the War Council chamber, Supreme Leader, the intelligence chief began. "The humans have not surrendered." "I can see that," Steve said. "Have they mobilized their military?" "That's the precise matter I need to brief you on." Supreme Leader, Steve wotted, his 6 eyes arranged in the expression his staff had learned to recognize as dangerous patience. "We are having significant difficulty determining what their current military actually looks like." Steve's eyes blinked in sequence. "What do you mean by significant difficulty?" "Their active standing military fleet is approximately 8,000 warships. That figure we have confirmed with reasonable confidence." "Good. We have 40,000 warships. This is not a problem." "Continue." "But, Supreme Leader, those 8,000 ships, we don't have reliable intelligence on what they're equipped with at present. What do you mean you don't know what they're equipped with? Your intelligence. Supreme Leader, in the last 3,000 years, our intelligence efforts regarding humanity focused primarily on their political movements, cultural shifts, and economic patterns. We did not focus heavily on their military technological development because, with the Accord in place, there was no perceived military threat to track. The humans have been developing and modifying their fleet for 3,000 years. We know with certainty what it looked like approximately 1,000 years ago. What did it look like 1,000 years ago? The intelligence chief paused in a way that did not inspire confidence. Terrifying. Supreme Leader. And it has had another full 1,000 years of unobserved development since our last reliable assessment. Steve was very still. What else are you not telling me? Their colonies. Our estimates assumed humanity had perhaps 200 to 300 established colonies within their originally permitted territory under the Accord. There was a pause that lasted slightly too long. They have over 2,000 established colonies. Supreme Leader, several of them significantly outside the original boundary lines from the Accord, which is technically a violation. But 2,000 colonies. 2,047 at last confirmed count. Supreme Leader, each of which has some form of local defense installation. Yes, Supreme Leader, and we have no current intelligence on what those installations look like. No, Supreme Leader, not current intelligence. No. The silence in the War Council chamber expanded to fill every corner of the room and press against the walls. What about ground forces? Steve asked, with the careful diction of someone controlling a significant emotional reaction. The intelligence chief placed a data tablet on the table and took 3 steps backward, which was not standard protocol, but which seemed, in T-moment, instinctively wise. The humans have approximately 12 billion trained military personnel distributed across their home systems and colonies. Supreme Leader. Steve stared at the tablet. 12 billion trained military personnel. Yes, Supreme Leader. Their total population is roughly 400 billion, but they operate a universal civil defense training program for all citizens above a certain age, meaning approximately 1 in every 33 humans has formal military training of some kind, and the other 32 out of 33 civilians. Supreme Leader. But there is something critically important that you need to understand about human civilians specifically. Steve, wait. They do not stop fighting simply because they are not designated soldiers. In every conflict in human history, including conflicts against species far more powerful than themselves on paper, human civilians have fought with whatever was available, with mining equipment, if necessary, with their bare hands, on at least one documented occasion. The distinction between human soldier and human civilian appears to be largely administrative rather than behavioral. Steve picked up the data tablet. He read it carefully. He put it back down on the table. "Get me the full War Council," he said. "Everyone. Now. Immediately. Supreme Leader. And pull everything we have on the Kepler Reach incident. Every report, every intercept, every field observation, everything that was filed and then apparently filed so deeply into the classified archives that my entire advisory council forgot it existed." "Yes, Supreme Leader." The door closed behind the intelligence chief. Steve sat alone in the council chamber for a long moment. He pulled up the war map. Humanity's colonies glowed like scattered seeds across a vast darkness, each one a point of light, 2,000 points of light. He had declared war on 2,000 colonies. 2,000 colonies full of people who apparently thought this was funny. Steve, for the first time since he had risen to power, felt something cold move through him that his people would have recognized as the beginning of understanding. Like and subscribe right now if you're hooked on this story. Share it with someone who deserves a great HFY experience today. We're getting to the battles, and they are everything you're hoping for. The first Vethkai offensive operation came 8 days after the declaration of war. 8 days, because logistics and fleet movement required it. But Steve had felt every hour of those 8 days like pressure building behind his eyes. The collective chose what their strategists had identified as a soft target, a mining colony on the outer edge of human space called Meridian Station. Population, 40,000 civilians and support workers, a garrison of exactly 200 soldiers, a small complement of patrol ships, The Vethkai sent 300 warships. Overwhelming force, by any calculation. They expected to be done and gone within a single planetary rotation. What they found at Meridian Station rewrote the opening chapter of the war before the war had properly begun. The patrol ships did not run. This was the first surprise. 12 patrol craft, outgunned 25-1, formed a defensive line in the orbital approach path and opened fire. Not because their pilots believed they could destroy 300 warships. They knew they couldn't. But they were buying time. The garrison commander at Meridian was a soldier named Captain Declan Ruiz, which caused some confusion in the Vethkai command records, because Declan appeared as a male name in their cultural database. But that was beside every conceivable point. Ruiz had received the declaration of war 8 days ago. She had used every single one of those 8 days. The mining drones had been armed with shaped charges from the colony's excavation supply. The mining tunnels running beneath the surface settlement had been converted into a three-dimensional defensive network. The civilian population had been given a choice. Evacuation transports were available for anyone who wanted to leave. 31,000 of 40,000 chose to stay and fight. Ruiz had organized them, not into soldiers, because there wasn't time to make soldiers. Into defenders, into people who knew the tunnels, knew the terrain, knew every supply, cache, and maintenance hatch and emergency corridor. Into people who had looked at 300 warships on an approach vector and decided that this was their home and it was going to cost something to take it. The Battle of Meridian Station lasted 4 days. When it was over, the remaining Vethkai ships retreated from a mining colony. They had lost 89 warships, over 12,000 soldiers. The ground assault teams that had landed had been destroyed almost entirely by civilians with improvised weapons fighting in tunnels, so narrow that superior numbers meant nothing. Meridian had lost 3 patrol ships, 42 soldiers, and 618 civilians. 618 deaths that Declan Ruiz would carry for the rest of her life, alongside the knowledge that 31,000 people had decided to fight beside her, and most of them had come home. The Vethkai Fleet Commander's after-action report to the War Council was brief and unambiguous. This was not a mining colony operating at standard readiness. I do not know with certainty what it was, but the classification soft target was catastrophically wrong. He did not include a request for follow-up orders. He resigned his commission instead. Ruiz sent a single transmission to Earth Defense Command 14 minutes after the last Vethkai ship cleared the system boundary. It read, "Meridian holds. Please send coffee. We are completely out of coffee, and it is a genuine emergency." Earth Defense Command sent 3 supply ships loaded with coffee, ammunition, medical supplies, and 3 full combat squadrons. They also sent a medal, which Ruiz wore, and which she privately felt was somewhat beside the point compared to the coffee. But the Battle of Meridian Station wasn't the thing that truly alarmed the Vethkai War Council. The thing that alarmed them was what became clear in the 3 weeks following, as more intelligence came in. Every colony on the human frontier had received the same declaration of war. Every colony had had the same 8 days before the first expected attacks, and every single one of them had spent those 8 days doing exactly what Ruiz had done at Meridian. Digging in, arming what could be armed, converting civilian equipment into weapons, organizing, preparing, because humanity had learned something 3,000 years ago at the Kepler Reach, and it had passed that lesson down through every generation since. You don't wait for the enemy to come to you, helpless and unprepared. You make wherever you are into a place the enemy will regret ever having found. This was not written doctrine. It wasn't military policy. It wasn't something the government had mandated or Earth Defense Command had ordered. It was just how humans thought about things when someone pointed a gun at them. A Vethka citizen, told the enemy fleet was coming, would evacuate or seek collective protection, or wait for the collective's military to respond. A human citizen, told the enemy fleet was coming, apparently started walking their property looking for anything that could be used as a weapon, and then helping their neighbors do the same. The Vethkai Council sat with this intelligence for a long time. One of the senior strategists, being called Architect Victory, said something that the historical record would preserve across centuries. We declared war on them under the assumption they would behave as prey species behave. Frightened, disorganized, dependent on central authority for direction. They are not behaving like prey. What are they behaving like? Steve asked, and there was something different in his voice now. Something careful. I don't have a precise word for it. Architect of Victory admitted, and for a being whose entire career was built on precise words, this was a significant moment. The closest concept I have is they're behaving like something that has been ready for this. Something that has been ready for this for a very long time. The room was very quiet. No rational civilization anticipates a war 3,000 years in advance, Steve said. No rational civilization does. No, the strategist agreed. Supreme Leader, I am becoming increasingly uncertain that rationale, as we define it, is the correct framework for analyzing human behavior. Like and subscribe if this story is everything you needed today. Share it right now. Let's make sure this reaches every HFY fan out there. The best part of this war is just beginning. In the third week of the war, the human fleet moved. Not defensively. Not pulling back to protect the home systems. Not forming a defensive perimeter around Earth. Offensively. Forward. Into Vethkai space. This had not been in any of the collective's strategic projections. Every model they had built assumed humans would turtle, consolidate, fall back to defend what they had. Instead, humanity did what humanity had always done when someone started a fight with them. They escalated. The offensive fleet was commanded by Admiral Jahuan, a woman who had spent 4 decades in uniform and who had a reputation among her peers for 2 specific qualities: an almost supernatural ability to read a battlefield 3 moves ahead of where it currently was, and an absolute, foundational, constitutional refusal to lose. She commanded 2,200 warships, and she was heading for the Vethkai border systems with the calm purposefulness of someone who had already decided how this was going to end. Air orders, which she had written herself after a lengthy discussion with Earth Defense Command that had been less a briefing and more a negotiation, were 3 sentences long. Find the Vethkai nervous system. Remove it. Come home. The Vethkai Intelligence Service detected the fleet movement and immediately began running intercept projections. 40,000 ships against 2,200. The numbers were comforting. The numbers they were about to discover were misleading, because Jiawen wasn't going where the models expected. She wasn't targeting Vethkai military installations, not the shipyards, not the fleet staging areas, not the command posts. She was targeting the relay network. The relay network was the invisible infrastructure that held 11 star systems together: communication relays, logistics coordination nodes, supply routing stations. The nervous system of an interstellar civilization. Destroy enough of it, and you didn't just cut communication. You blinded the fleet. You paralyzed supply lines. You made coordinated military action across 11 star systems nearly impossible. It wasn't a glorious battle plan. It didn't make for stirring propaganda. There were no decisive fleet engagements. No climactic battles where history would be made in a single afternoon. It was the kind of plan that won wars, while the enemy was still looking for the place where the real fighting was supposed to happen. Jiawen hit the first relay cluster with 200 ships. Destroyed it in 4 hours. Was 3 systems away before the Vethkai response fleet arrived to find empty space and debris. Then she hit the second cluster. Gone before the response. The third. The fourth. Each time, faster than the reaction. Each time, leaving nothing for the Vethkai to engage. Each time, the communication map of the collective developed another gap where light used to flow. She's not fighting us, Architect of Victory told the War Council, staring at the display that was increasingly full of dark patches where relay nodes used to be. She's not even trying to fight us. She's unwinding us. She's pulling the threads out one at a time. How do we stop her? Steve demanded. We predict where she's going next, and position forces ahead of her. Then do that. Supreme Leader, we cannot predict where she's going next because she is not following any pattern our analytical models can identify. Everything has a pattern. Every strategy has an underlying logic. Yes, Supreme Leader. Her underlying logic appears to be hit whatever damages us most, wherever we are least protected, in whatever order is least predictable. That's not a pattern. That's just chaos. I believe, Supreme Leader, that this is intentional. I believe this is the pattern. Steve looked at the display, looked at the gaps spreading through his relay network, like dark water through cracks in stone. What about our production advantage? Askeith. We're building ships faster than they are. The intelligence chief, who had been standing very quietly at the back of the room, spoke up. Supreme Leader, that is the other matter I need to brief you on. Like and subscribe, we're in the middle of the war now and humanity is just warming up. Share this story. More people need to hear it. Human industry had shifted. Not because it was ordered to, not because of government mandate, or emergency decree, or supreme command directive. It had shifted because humans had looked at what was needed and started doing it without waiting to be told. Shipyards that had been building commercial transports and colony vessels were building warships. Factories that had been producing consumer goods, agricultural equipment, construction materials, were producing weapons, armor, ammunition. Research institutions that had been working on medical advances and terraforming technology had pivoted to weapons systems and defensive countermeasures. No central command had ordered any of this. No rationing authority had mandated the shift. The people who ran these facilities had looked at the situation, understood what was required, and simply started doing it. This was the thing the Vethkai had never managed to correctly model. In the collective, production happened because the collective decreed it. Resources were allocated. Workers were assigned quotas. Output was ordered and tracked and reported. It was efficient. It was organized. It was, by every reasonable metric, an excellent way to run an industrial civilization. But it had a ceiling. The collective produced exactly as much as the collective decided to produce. No more. No less. The ceiling was the plan. Humanity had no ceiling. When the threat was real, when the cause was understood, when people could see with their own eyes what needed doing, humanity produced as much as it possibly could until the thing that needed doing was done. The Vethkai Intelligence Service, 8 weeks into the war, realized with dawning horror that they had made a catastrophic category error in their production estimates. They had looked at humanity's official military industrial output, the government shipyards, the defense contractors, the officially designated military production facilities, and used that to project wartime capacity. They had not accounted for the rest of it. The colony that had converted its entire agricultural manufacturing sector to produce weapons components, because the colony governor had made the call and the people had agreed. The independent station that had turned its commercial docking bays into improvised ship assembly facilities. The private companies that had pivoted entirely to military production without government contracts, because they had looked at the war and decided this was what they were doing now. Supreme Leader, the intelligence chief said, in what had become a recurring nightmare of briefings that Steve had come to dread. We have updated production estimates. Steve read the numbers. He read them a second time. He did not laugh, because Steve did not laugh. But something behind his 6 eyes shifted. They have doubled their active fleet in 8 weeks, he said. Yes, Supreme Leader. Their 8,000 ships are now 16,000 ships. 17,400 as of this morning's estimate. And this estimate is accurate. We have verified it through 4 independent intelligence streams. The number is conservative. If anything, they build 9,000 warships in 8 weeks. They did not build them from nothing? Supreme Leader? Many were partially constructed commercial vessels that were retrofitted. Many were civilian ships converted to military specification. Humans are, it appears, very good at converting things that were not weapons into things that are weapons. We've encountered some evidence of that before, Steve said, very quietly. The endurance incident. Yes, Supreme Leader. Steve stood up from the council table and walked to the display wall. He looked at the war map for a long time. His 11-star systems, humanity's 2,000 colonies. The gaps in his relay network where Gialwen's fleet had been. The colony defense markers that had stopped being soft targets and started being fortresses. The production estimates that had doubled in 8 weeks and would double again in 8 more. At current trajectory, he said. How long before their fleet matches ours in size? Architect to Victory answered without hesitation, because he had already run the calculation. At current confirmed production rates, accounting for losses on both sides so far. 4 months, Supreme Leader. 4 months. Yes. And, Supreme Leader, their quality is not degrading as their quantity increases. The ships they are producing now are, by captured specification analysis, better than the ships they had at the start of this war. Steve was quiet. They are improving, he said. They appear to improve under pressure. Supreme Leader, it is a pattern we see consistently across their historical record. Adversity does not degrade human capability. It appears to accelerate it. Steve walked back to his seat. Sat. Dun. He thought about the classified archive report that had been sitting in his review queue for 3 months before the declaration of war. The one from 3,000 years ago. The one he had been told was overblown, outdated, and the product of a shaken commander's embarrassment. The one that said, "Do not fight these creatures. I want to speak with Architect of Victory privately," he said. "Everyone else, leave us." The chamber emptied. Like and subscribe if you want to know how this ends. Share this video right now. We're so close to the turning point. It gets even better from here, I promise. The private conversation between Steve and his chief strategist lasted 3 hours. No recording was made. No transcript survived. What was known was what came after. Steve convened the full war council the following morning and said, in a voice that had something new in it, something that sounded to those who knew him. Almost like wisdom arriving too late, but arriving nonetheless. "We need to discuss how this war ends." Architect of Victory spoke first. "Supreme Leader, I have been preparing that analysis. Tell me, we have 3 realistic options. Option 1, we commit our full fleet to a decisive engagement, accept massive casualties, and attempt to destroy humanity's production capacity before their fleet reaches numerical parity. Projected outcome, we destroy some percentage of their production. They rebuild. They are angrier. They've already demonstrated they become more effective under pressure. This option ends badly for us. Option 2, we fortify our home systems, pull all forces back, and fight a purely defensive war of attrition. Projected outcome, their fleet reaches parity in 4 months. We are surrounded in 11 systems against their 2,000 colonies. They have more people, more resources, more production, more motivation. Attrition favors them. This option ends badly for us, but more slowly. Option 3, Steve said. Option 3, Supreme Leader, is that we contact them and discuss terms before Option 1 or Option 2 becomes the only path available. The War Council was silent. "We declared war on them," one of the council members said. "We ended the accord. We gave them 72 hours to surrender their civilization. They will not deal fairly with us now." Architect of Victory had spent 3 weeks reading every piece of human historical data his intelligence service could find. Every war, every peace, every treaty, every aftermath. "They will," he said, with quiet certainty. "I have studied every armed conflict in human history. When humans defeat an enemy that fought with some level of honor, they do not demand total annihilation. They demand recognition. They want acknowledgement. They want the other party to say, in plain language, with sincerity, 'You are a peer. You are not lesser. You are not something we can simply discard.' This war, from the human perspective, has never been about territory or resources. Their colonies were already there. Their fleet was already built. This war, for them, is about the insult. We told them they had 72 hours to surrender their civilization to a species that saw them as a managed problem. We implied, in the most direct possible language, that they were lesser, that they could be disposed of. Everything they have done in this war has been the response to that insult. If we approach them now with genuine respect, not pretended respect, not diplomatic language designed to obscure contempt, with genuine acknowledgement that we were wrong, that we broke the accord, that we misunderstood what they are, they will deal fairly. Because dealing fairly when the enemy finally understands is also, consistently, what humans do. Steve looked at the war map for the last time. "Arrange contact," he said, "through the Terrellian Confederation, third-party channels. It will appear desperate, Supreme Leader. It is desperate. I would rather appear honestly desperate than dishonestly confident. Well, we lose everything. Yes. Supreme Leader. An architect. One more thing. Supreme Leader. Pull the Endurance report from the classified archives. The original one. The one from 3,000 years ago. Distribute it to every member of this council. Every senior military commander. Every intelligence chief. They should have read it before we started this. Make sure they read it now, so we understand exactly how we arrived here. Yes, Supreme Leader, it will be done. Like and subscribe, the war is ending and the real story is just beginning. Share this video with someone who needs to hear what comes next. The diplomatic contact came through the Turelian Neutral Confederation, a small but ancient civilization that had survived several thousand years of galactic politics by being extraordinarily talented at not choosing sides. The Turelians sent a transmission to Earth Defense Command marked urgent and confidential, which in Turelian diplomatic language meant, "Please treat this as urgent and confidential, but we are not personally involved." The Vethkai Supreme Collective requests a cessation of hostilities and the opening of good faith diplomatic dialogue. They acknowledge the current military situation as untenable and express willingness to discuss all outstanding matters. General Mara Ase read the message in her office at 6:23 a.m. on a Thursday that had otherwise been entirely ordinary. She read it twice, then she forwarded it to the Earth Council with a single line of commentary. Told you. Do. The Earth Council debated for 48 hours because humanity was not of one mind, and never had been. And this was simultaneously its greatest weakness and the source of its greatest strength. There were voices that argued for pushing forward, for pressing the advantage, for making the Vethkai feel every colony lost, every ship destroyed, every civilian casualty and every tunnel fight on every frontier world. There were voices that said, they broke the accord. They fired first 3,000 years ago, and again now. Make them feel the full weight of that. There were voices, perhaps not the loudest, but perhaps the most important, that said, we went to war to be respected, not to rule. If they're ready to respect us, then we have already won. Admiral Jiao Wen, still operating in Vethkai space, still methodically removing relay nodes with the calm precision of someone who genuinely enjoyed her work, sent her own transmission to the council. It was 4 sentences. We have made our point with clarity. They understand what we are now. They will not forget it, and we should not need to repeat it. Continuing this war does not serve the people who are dying in it. Make the deal. The council made the deal. The negotiations took 3 months and were held on a neutral orbital station in Turelian space. They were tense, complicated, occasionally heated, and frequently difficult. But they concluded, Teneo Treaty, not a truce this time, not a temporary pause born of exhaustion and fear, but a genuine, negotiated mutual recognition treaty between 2 civilizations. Was signed by representatives of both peoples. Its terms were clear. The Vethkai formally and publicly acknowledged that humanity was a peer civilization, not a lesser species, not a managed threat, not a tolerated presence within boundaries they'd permitted. A peer, equal in standing before the community of galactic civilizations. The territory of humanity had expanded into over 3,000 years, was formally recognized as human space in its entirety, including the colonies outside the original Accord boundaries. Both civilizations agreed to maintain permanent embassies, to communicate openly and regularly, and to submit any future border disputes to neutral third-party arbitration. The Vethkai would pay reparations for the damage caused by their offensive operations, structured as preferential trade agreements and technology exchange over the following century. And there was one final clause, added at the insistence of the human negotiating team and agreed to by the Vethkai delegation after only a brief resistance. It stated, in plain language in both species' official written forms, the Vethkai Supreme Collective acknowledges that the decision to dissolve the Galactic Accord and declare war upon humanity was made in fundamental error. This error was based upon a misunderstanding of humanity's nature, capacity, and character that was inexcusable given the historical record available to the Collective's leadership. The Collective expresses this acknowledgement without reservation and commits that this error will not be repeated. Steve signed that clause personally. His 6 eyes by several accounts from those present, showed something that the Vethkai did not display often or easily. Something that looked unmistakably like shame. Like and subscribe right now. The final chapter of this story is something special. Share it with everyone. This ending is worth it. The signing ceremony was broadcast across both civilizations simultaneously. On Earth and across 2,000 colonies, people watched it in cafes and living rooms, in colony mess halls and orbital station common areas and military barracks. Some cried. Some cheered. Some simply nodded and went back to whatever they had been doing, because they had known all along this was where it would end, and the only surprise was that it hadn't taken longer. The broadcaster, who had eaten a snack while delivering war news, watched the signing, nodded once, and said, "Called it on day 1. He then ate another snack. In the command center below Geneva, General Mara Use watched the signing on the monitor in her office. A cup of actual coffee. Good coffee, the kind she'd been denied for months of wartime. Austerity, warm between her hands. Lieutenant Yusuf Adebayo stood beside her. He had aged in 6 months, in a way that had nothing to do with time passing and everything to do with the things those months had contained. He had been in 3 engagements. He had made decisions and lived with them. He was not the young man who had stood wide-eyed on a Tuesday morning, confused about why his general was laughing. "Genera," he said, as the signing concluded and cameras showed reactions from across human space. "I understand now why you laughed that first morning." Mara looked at him. "Tell me what you understand." "Because we had been waiting for this," he said. "Not hoping for it, not expecting it to happen on any particular morning. But ready, always ready. Every colony that spent 8 days turning itself into a fortress before the first ship showed up. Every civilian who picked up a mining drone. Ruiz at Meridian Jowin and the relay campaign. The shipyards and factories that shifted without being asked. We've been telling ourselves who we are for 3,000 years, passing it down, generation to generation. The endurance. Captain Ferris, the children in the engine room. We never let ourselves forget, so when the moment came, we didn't have to figure out what to do. We already knew. Mara smiled, the quiet smile that had lived in her a long time. "You know what their biggest mistake actually was?" she said. "Not the tactical mistakes, the fundamental one. Underestimating us," Adebayo said. "That's part of it. But deeper, they assumed 3,000 years of peace had changed what we are. They looked at the Accord and saw a species that had been managed, contained, comfortable, made soft by safety. Peace didn't make us soft, Lieutenant. Peace gave us 3,000 years to build, to grow, to fill 2,000 worlds with people who would rather fight than surrender. The vet Kai looked at 3,000 years of quiet and decided we were sleeping." She turned back to the monitor, where the signing ceremony was giving way to celebrations across human space, where people were laughing and crying and calling their families. "We weren't sleeping," she said. "We were getting ready." 3 months after the signing of the Mutual Recognition Treaty, Sovereign Voyage of the Eternal Collective requested a personal audience with General Mara Ase. It was unusual, unprecedented, perhaps, but the request was genuine and respectful, and after consultation, Mara agreed. They met on a neutral station, just the 2 of them and translators, in a small conference room that had been set up with chairs for both species anatomies, and nothing else. Steve was tall, broad, six-eyed, with a presence that filled rooms in the way that very powerful beings often do. Mara was 61. Gray Street. Shorter than her reputation suggested, and completely unbothered by rooms or presences. They sat across the table and looked at each other for a moment. "I need to understand something," Steve said. "Ask." The morning the declaration was received, the intercepts said you laughed. I did. A full laugh. Not shock. Not disbelief. Genuine laughter. Yes. Why? Mara thought about how to explain it across the distance between 2 civilizations that had spent 3,000 years misunderstanding each other. "Your collective looked at us," she said finally. and saw what we were 3,000 years ago. Young species, small fleet, a handful of colonies, something that could be managed, something that could be ended, if someone decided to end it. You kept that picture in your mind for 3,000 years. When we grew, you updated your territory maps, but not your fundamental understanding. You saw our economy. You saw our political structures. You saw our cultural outputs. But you didn't look at what we'd been doing with our military and our industry and our people for 3,000 years. When the declaration came in, I laughed because I thought, they believe they know who we are. They have no idea who we are. By the time they figure it out, this will already be over. You were right, Steve said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, were you afraid? At any point, was there a moment where your people were afraid? Mara answered honestly, because honesty was what this moment deserved. Some of us were the ones who looked at 40,000 ships in a 72-hour deadline and took it at face value, and the ones who didn't take it at face value. They laughed, she said. Steve's six eyes were still for a long time. Then he said, I want to tell you something. Something I haven't told my council. Mara waited. The night after the declaration, before any battle had been fought, my intelligence chief brought me the complete archive file on the Kepler Reach incident. 3,000 years ago. The Endurance. I read the original field reports for the first time, the ones from the commander who retreated, the ones that had been classified so thoroughly that no one in my administration had actually read them. What did they say? Mara asked. They said, do not fight these creatures. Not because they are more powerful. Because they are different in a way that makes conventional power calculations irrelevant. They said, a species that turns mining equipment into weapons and puts children in the engine room to help with repairs and takes 17 direct hits and keeps flying does not understand that it is supposed to stop. 3,000 years later, Mara said, we still don't understand that. No, Steve said. I can see that clearly now. The report recommended never breaking the accord, he continued. It said the accord was the best possible outcome for both civilizations, that we had stumbled into a peace that served everyone and we should protect it carefully. We didn't protect it. I didn't protect it. I listened to advisors who told me the report was old, that humanity had changed, that the long peace had made you manageable. They were wrong. They were, Mara agreed, without cruelty. There is one thing I want to ask, Steve said. A personal request, separate from diplomacy. Ask. The Endurance ship itself, does it still exist? Mara blinked. It was not the question she'd expected. It's in a museum, has been for 2,000 years. A museum? The National Museum of Human History, in Nairobi. Climate-controlled, full preservation. Every dent, every weld, every improvised repair exactly as it was when she came home. Steve's six eyes did something she couldn't name precisely, something that might have been wonder. You kept it. We kept it. Why? After 3,000 years, why does a cargo hauler sit in a museum? And Mara answered with the complete and simple truth that explained everything. Explained 3,000 years. Explained Meridian. Explained Jiawen. Explained every laughing human who had read a declaration of war and felt something kindle in their chest instead of fear. Because we never wanted to forget, she said. What it looked like to refuse to stop. What it cost. What it meant. We keep the Endurance so that every generation can walk past it and understand, not as a lesson, not as a warning, but as a fact about what they are. That's what we are. That cargo hauler is what we are, and we don't want to forget it. Not ever. Steve sat with that for a long moment. Then he did something that no translator had a word for, a gesture involving all four of his limbs and his neck simultaneously. That seemed to carry the weight of. I understand. I finally and completely understand. He returned to Vethkai space the following day. His first act upon resuming full governmental authority was to add the Kepler Reach incident. The full account, not the sanitized version, not the summary. The complete record including the field commander's report, to the mandatory educational curriculum for every HFY student from their equivalent of primary school through university. Not as a lesson about humans, not as a cautionary tale about underestimating enemies, as a lesson about what it looked like when a species decided, collectively and individually and in the bone-deep way that doesn't require a decree to enforce, that survival was non-negotiable. He thought if his people could understand even a fraction of that, the HFY collective might be worth the stars it occupied. On Earth, on a Tuesday morning that was completely unremarkable except that it was the first Tuesday of genuine peace in 6 months. A school group gathered in the National Museum of Human History in Nairobi. They gathered in front of the Endurance. The ship filled the entire east wing of the museum. She sat in climate-controlled stillness, massive and battered and real, her hull telling the story in metal, the dents where hits had landed that should have ended her, the welds where human hands had patched her in the middle of a firefight, the improvised launch tubes welded onto the cargo bay doors where mining drones had become missiles, the dark stains but the conservators had chosen to preserve because they were part of the truth of what had happened here. A teacher stood before the class and told them the story. The scouting force, the 1,200 colonists, the 6 patrol craft against 200 warships, the 17 hours. Captain Yolanda Ferris and her 20 years of cargo hauling and her complete absence of military training and her absolute refusal to stop flying. The mining drones loaded with explosive charges, the teenagers helping reroute power, the children in the engine room, the most armored place on the ship, running power couplings through maintenance corridors while the battle raged above them. 17 hits. A retreat from the attacking force, a ship that came home. The children listened with the particular quality of attention that children give to things that are true. At the end, one small girl raised her hand. Why didn't they stop? She asked. When the odds were that bad, why didn't they just surrender? The teacher smiled. It was a smile that had been worn by teachers telling this story for 3,000 years, and it never got old. Because stopping didn't occur to them, she said. They had 1,200 people to protect. They had somewhere they were trying to go. They had a job to do. And humans, when they have a job to do and people to protect, don't stop until the job is done. Even if the job is hard. Even if the odds are bad. Even if everyone watching thinks they should have stopped long ago. The girl looked at the ship for a long moment, her small face serious and considering. Then she nodded, the way children nod when something makes complete and perfect sense to them. When something true lands exactly right. Okay, she said, Jet Italiano. And in that moment, as it had in every generation before, for 3,000 years, the story passed on, the weight of it, the pride of it. The quiet, unbreakable promise of it. Somewhere across the galaxy, in a HFY classroom, a student was reading the Kepler-Reach file for the first time and feeling something move in them that their language didn't have a perfect word for. And on 2,000 human colonies, people went about their days, growing things and building things and arguing about things and loving things and laughing at things, as humans do. The shipyards were building colony ships again. The factories were making things people wanted rather than things people needed to survive. The researchers had gone back to medicine and agriculture in the long, slow work of understanding the universe. And somewhere in all of it, in every colony, in every station, in every ship crossing between stars, the story was alive, passed in the way important things are passed, not in classrooms only, but at dinner tables and in the spaces between sleeping and waking. In the things parents say to children when the children ask the right question at the right moment. The story of a cargo hauler and a captain with no military training and 1,200 people who chose to fight with what they had. The story of 17 hits and 6 patrol ships and mining drones against 200 warships. The story of children in the engine room and civilians in the tunnels and colonists who looked at 300 HFY warships and picked up whatever was closest and decided this was their home. The story of a cold Tuesday morning when someone declared war on humanity and the second highest ranking military officer on Earth laughed. Because she knew. Because humanity knew. What they were. What they had always been. What no amount of time or peace or comfort was ever going to change. We are the species that turned mining equipment into weapons and refused to stop flying. We are the species that laughed when they declared war on us and then showed them exactly why that laughter was warranted. We are the species that built 2,000 colonies in 3,000 years and never once forgot that peace and safety are not the same thing. We are the species that kept a battered cargo hauler in a museum for 3,000 years so that every child who walked past it could understand, in their bones, what they came from. We don't stop. We have never stopped. We will never stop. That is what we are. And we are not done yet. Not even close. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Genuinely, sincerely, thank you for being here and watching every second of this. Please hit that like button right now if this story meant something to you. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. We have so much more coming. And share this video. Share it with every human you know who needs a reminder of what we are. Because this story deserves to be heard. And you're the one who can make that happen. We don't stop. We never stop. See you in the next one. 3,000 years before any of this happened, a woman named Yolanda Ferris had a decision to make. Her ship was taking fire. Her escorts were outgunned 30-1. Her cargo hold was full of families with children who had come this far, trusting her. She could have surrendered. The math was clear. The odds were undeniable. Any rational calculation pointed in one direction. She flew instead. She didn't make a speech about it. Didn't give a rallying cry to her crew. Didn't announce her intentions on the ship-wide channel. She just flew and kept flying and told her engineer to patch what could be patched and her security chief to make the mining drones work as weapons. Because Yolanda Ferris, like most humans who find themselves in impossible situations, didn't have time to process the impossibility. She had a ship to fly and people to protect and a job to finish. That was enough. 3,000 years later, every child who visited the museum and stood before the Endurance was, without entirely knowing it, standing before that decision. The decision to fly when everything rationale said to stop. The decision to fight with mining drones when you didn't have missiles. The decision to put children in the engine room and keep them busy so they weren't afraid. The decision to take 17 hits and keep flying because stopping didn't occur to you. Not courage exactly. Not recklessness. Something harder to name and more fundamental. A refusal. Deep. Instinctive. Passed down in blood and story in museum visits and dinner table conversations. To accept that the situation was as impossible as it appeared. Because humans, when presented with an impossible situation, do not see impossible. They see a problem they haven't solved yet, and they get to work. That was what the Vethkai Collective had never modeled correctly. Not the warships, not the production capacity, not the 2,000 colonies of determined people. The refusal, the bone-deep, civilization-wide, 3,000-year-old refusal to accept that there was a situation humanity couldn't work through if it kept working. Architect of Victory, in his memoirs written a decade after the war, described the moment he finally understood it. He had been reviewing the battle records from Meridian Station, trying to understand how a mining colony with 200 soldiers had held against 300 warships. He had looked at the figure. 31,000 civilians who chose to stay and fight. He had stared at that number for a very long time. Then he had written in his notes, "They chose. That is the thing I could not model." They were given a choice and 31,000 of them chose to fight. Not because they were ordered to. Not because leaving was impossible. Because they chose. Because they looked at the odds and looked at their home and chose. How do you build a military model for a civilization where 31,000 civilians will choose to fight for a mining colony? You can't. There isn't a model for it. You simply have to understand that when you go to war with humanity, you are not fighting their military. You are fighting all of them. Every single one of them. Because that is what they decided to be. The memoirs became required reading in every Vethkai military academy within a generation. The chapter on Meridian Station was the most annotated, the most discussed, the most returned to by students trying to understand what exactly they were looking at. What they were looking at was humanity. Really looking, perhaps, for the first time. And what they found, when they looked honestly, was not a warlike species. We are humanity. We never stop. Not ever. Because when something needs doing, we do it. All of us. Every single one. That is the truth. That has always been the truth, and it always will be. We don't stop.